So we are gonna get this all cleaned up for her and hopefully deter any more dumping. It is a corner lot and there's a whole lot to do, including clearing up her backyard, which has a ton of debris in it. We're gonna get this looking so much better for her today.
Sean Stockman is a YouTube millionaire in terms of views. But out in the real world, he gets pulled over by the cops for a bizarre crime, picking up other people's trash. Behind the flashy before and after videos isn't the rosy, inspiring journey we're used to seeing on screen. It's a harsh reality, a steep price that no thumbnail will ever tell you about. But to understand why a man would willingly put himself through all that trouble, we have to rewind the clock back to the days when he was just a diligent office worker, living a flatline existence inside a pre-programmed box. The man in the box. Before becoming the guy Detroit calls Mr. Clean, Sean Stockman was just a guy living in Michigan with a job that looked great on paper. Michigan is a place that knows what it means to be left behind. It's the land of cities that once thrived and then faded, of shuttered factories and neighborhoods that empty out year by year. Growing up in that landscape, he probably got used to seeing places that used to matter, now completely ignored. This detail will come back later in a way nobody expected. Sean married young and had kids early. Everything he had, he built from scratch, no safety net, no shortcuts. His first true passion was shooting and editing wedding videos. He loved visual storytelling, and weddings gave him exactly that. For years, he stood behind the lens, capturing the happiest days of people's lives. He caught the tears of joy, the hand-holding, the vows. He was good at it. But the more milestones of strangers he filmed, the more his own life felt like it was flatlining. So, he pivoted to the auto industry. It was the safe bet. A steady paycheck, a solid title, a clear corporate ladder. For 2 decades, he clocked in every morning and played the part. From the outside looking in, he was the poster child for stability. But there's one thing that never makes the highlight reel. Sean lived with a constant sense of imposter syndrome. Not just sometimes, almost all the time. Even after proving himself for 20 years, that little voice asking, "Am I really good enough?" never shut up. The longer he stayed, the louder it got. He once described the feeling as living inside a box, not dying, but not exactly living either, just existing inside a structure he had outgrown. The breaking point probably arrived on an entirely ordinary day. A morning like any other, sitting at his desk, realizing he was playing the role of someone who was alive, rather than actually living. It wasn't a loud revelation. It was just a quiet knowing that he couldn't keep doing this forever. But the first people to say it out loud weren't Sean. It was the very people who should have fired him. The words from the people who should have fired him. Sean's bosses saw what he was trying to hide. They saw an employee doing his job, but running on fumes. They noticed the gap between the guy he was on the weekend and the guy he was from Monday to Friday. On the weekends, he came alive. During the week, he faded. They also saw what he did off the clock. He was still editing videos, still telling stories visually, pouring an energy into it that his day job could never spark. The disconnect was too obvious to ignore. In most corporate settings, a slumping employee gets one of 2 things: a performance review or pressure to step it up. Sean got neither. Instead, his higher-ups pulled him aside and said something almost no one expects from an employer. They told him he had genuine talent in that creative space and that he should go after it. That conversation didn't flip his life upside down overnight. He didn't walk out of the office that afternoon a reborn man. But something cracked open. For 20 years, he had been waiting for permission from himself, and it never came. Now, it was coming from the outside, from the very people signing his paychecks. Walking away wasn't simple. Before deciding anything, he had to talk to his wife, Tessa. The first conversation about walking away from a stable job is never easy for a couple raising kids. Ditching a steady salary to chase a half-baked idea is a gamble, and they both knew it. Then came his last day at the company. He cleared out his desk, grabbed his personal belongings, and walked out the door that had kept him tethered for 2 decades. The question then was simple. What was he going to chase? The answer, it turned out, wasn't a new job or a glamorous city. It was a place most people just wanted to drive through as fast as possible. The abandoned preschool. No one dared to stop. And when it all started, Sean was 41. That's not the age when people usually burn their old lives to the ground to start over, but Sean refused to settle. One day, driving through Detroit, he passed an abandoned preschool. Weeds had swallowed the walkways. The whole property looked exactly like a city that had stopped caring for itself. Most people would slow down, feel a twinge of sadness, and keep driving. Sean pulled over. He walked onto the lot, bent down, and started pulling weeds with his bare hands. That afternoon turned into a mission, and that mission evolved into the YouTube channel Midlife Stockman. Over time, it hit nearly 1 million subscribers and over 140 million views. Sean became the guy locals dubbed Detroit's Mr. Clean. But none of that was part of the master plan. His original intention was simply not to drive past a ruin without doing something about it. The inspirational version of the story usually glides over the brutal early days. Quitting a 20-year career in the system to dive into a path with no pay, no title, and no structure is terrifying. Tessa, his wife, trusted and supported him right from the start, back when he was just a guy with a few beat-up tools and a solitary conviction. Society calls a middle-aged man's sudden life pivot a crisis. Sean called it a calling. However, what awaited him in Detroit was nowhere near as clean or tidy as the moniker made it sound. When kindness is mistaken for a threat. If you only watch the before and after videos, you'd think Sean's work is just satisfying manual labor. What the thumbnails don't show are the strangers calling the cops on him while he's cleaning up for free. The reason runs deeper than a simple misunderstanding. Detroit is a city that has been abandoned and burned so many times that even kindness looks suspicious. When a stranger shows up, the first reflex for many isn't gratitude, it's caution. Kindness isn't read as kindness, it's read as a trap. Sean learned this the hard way through confrontations, even getting reported for trespassing while helping a family that had actually invited him. The most memorable incident was when the police had to intervene right in the middle of a cleanup. Picture the scene. You're drenched in sweat, working for free, and suddenly you have to explain to a cop why you aren't a threat. The calm Sean maintained in those situations was forged through an understanding of the pain of people who had been let down by life too many times. There were times, after being stopped by authorities, when he wondered if all this was worth it. A normal person would have called it quits right there. What kept him going wasn't the views, but the people still waiting for him at the next lot. Alongside the social pressure was the sheer physical brutality of it. Sean worked under 90-plus degree heat, pushing his body through conditions that would break most people before lunch. Lot after lot, month after month. And then there was an afternoon unlike the rest. Working alone on a Detroit lot, something happened that he later filmed a video about with his hands still shaking. He said it was his closest call with real danger, something that could have altered his entire life. The very next day, he went right back to work. Because the dangers in Detroit were just part of the price of admission, the rest came from the very stories he was trying to salvage. The faces and the unbroken threads. This chapter isn't really about the yards. It's about what happens between two human beings in the split second a stranger knocks on the door. Every person Sean met taught him a different kind of connection. There was a woman in Detroit who prayed. Not hoped, not wished, prayed. When Sean showed up at her house unannounced, and she realized a stranger had driven all the way out there, fully equipped to help her for free, she broke down in tears. Through her crying, she told him she had been praying for someone to come help. Think about the weight of that. Here is a human being, sitting in her own home, looking out at a yard she can't physically handle, and the only option she has left is prayer. The moment Sean arrived wasn't just a yard getting cleaned. It was the moment someone who felt invisible was suddenly seen by someone else. Then there was Linda, 58. She lived with a disability that made walking, balancing, and speaking a struggle. Her backyard had spiraled out of control, not out of laziness, but because circumstances gave her no other choice. The profound part of Linda's story isn't the severity of her hardship. It's how Sean worked with her, not just for her. He spent days there, and what he gave back wasn't just a tidy plot of land. It was the feeling of being at home in her own house, the dignity of being treated like a person, not a charity case. Not every encounter was heavy. A woman named Erin opened her door one sweltering Monday morning in July to find Sean standing on her porch with a shovel. She assumed he was a cable guy, someone from Verizon or DirecTV trying to sell her something. When she realized what was actually happening, her entire demeanor flipped. She told him she had been waiting for this day. It was a light, warm moment, a breath of fresh air amidst the harder stories. Beyond the faces detailed here, there are hundreds of others. A single mom, a veteran, an entire network of people pushed into a corner by life. But amidst all those connections, there was one question Sean couldn't answer. At one particular lot, a kid looked up at him and asked if he was going to come back. Sean couldn't bring himself to promise. That was the first time it became glaringly obvious that connection also creates a burden. When you show up for someone, you also create someone who is expecting you to return. And that kid's question leads straight to the hardest truth of the whole story. The limits of two hands. There are some things a single pair of hands just can't fix. Sean has filmed a lot of rough properties, but there was one house in Detroit that was unlike anything he'd ever shot. This house was practically condemned, bordering on unlivable. Yet there was still a family living inside, simply because they had nowhere else to go. Sean filmed it, not to exploit it, but to bear witness. He understood that part of his job was showing people outside those neighborhoods what was actually happening on the inside, making visible what the city wanted to keep hidden. But this is also where the harshest limit is drawn. You can clean up a yard in a day. You can transform a lot in a weekend. You cannot fix the underlying reasons why a house is nearly declared unfit for human habitation. You can't weed out illness, poverty, or the years a family spent abandoned by the very systems meant to help them. You can only make the outside look like somebody cares. And then you have to leave. The family walks back inside, and the walls remain exactly the same. That's the part Sean never puts on a thumbnail. The veteran's yard he cleared will eventually get overgrown again. The single mom he helped still faces 100 problems he can't even touch. They aren't just doses of tragedy injected for narrative flair. They are proof of the hard truth that one person can't reach everything. And all of that weight falls right back onto Sean. He doesn't just finish a cleanup, drive away, and clear his mind. He absorbs those circumstances. The emotional labor doesn't wash off with the dirt at the end of the day. It builds up. It drains something out of him that a rising subscriber count can never replenish. There's one detail that says it all. He returned to a lot he had completely cleared a few months prior, and the weeds had grown right back. His hard work had vanished, as if it never happened. The question it raises is uncomfortable, but real. Is he actually healing these places, or just putting a Band-Aid on them? After that particular cleanup, there was a moment where he sat in his truck and couldn't even bring himself to turn the camera on. He just sat there in silence. That's the part of the story no video could ever capture. So the next question becomes unavoidable. If doing this takes so much out of him, what is Sean's success actually costing him? The true cost of success. Nearly 1 million subscribers, over 140 million views. Detroit's Mr. Clean. By every visible metric, Midlife Stockman is a massive success story. But look a little closer, and something else emerges. When you build an entire platform on showing up for strangers in their darkest moments, success comes with a kind of pressure most people can't even fathom. Almost 1 million people are watching. They are waiting for new content. They expect the next video to deliver the exact same emotional hit as the last one. The algorithm rewards consistency above all else. And that consistency isn't free, Not when it means doing grueling manual labor under a scorching sun, alone in a city that sometimes calls the cops on you, all while carrying the weight of dozens of heartbreaking stories on your shoulders. To be fair, Sean's business model actually works. He built multiple revenue streams: YouTube AdSense, a Patreon community, merchandise, and brand deals with tool companies. The community funds the resources, which keeps the service completely free for the people who need it most. It is a real, sustainable model. But a sustainable income and a depleted human being are not mutually exclusive. A person can make money and still run completely empty. Both things can be true at the same time. There's one small detail that exposes this shift better than any statistic. Sean used to run marathons. He hasn't run one in about 5 years. Back then, the distance was a personal achievement. 26.2 miles, a finish line, a number to conquer for himself. Now, he's running an entirely different kind of marathon, one measured not in miles, but in overgrown lots, in people, in years. Not to cross a finish line for himself, but to keep showing up for others. He traded a race with a finish line for a race that never ends. That is the exact portrait of making a living while burning out. And then there's the unavoidable question hanging over the viewers. Is filming people living in poverty during their most vulnerable moments an act of bearing witness, or is it exploitation? Supporters will say he shows the world what it desperately wants to forget. Skeptics will argue that, at the end of the day, someone's misery is being monetized for content. Both perspectives have a point. And there's a bitter paradox right in the middle of this story. Online, Sean is famous to millions of people around the globe. But his own neighbors, living right next door, might have absolutely no idea what he does for a living. All of this leads back to one final truth, the truth that makes this story more heartbreaking than it is inspiring. What has yet to be found. The name Midlife Stockman holds more truth than it seems on the surface. At 41, at an abandoned preschool, Sean didn't just find a yard to clean. He found a direction and answer that 20 years inside a corporate box could never give him. But having a purpose doesn't erase the painful parts. It just makes them worth it. Most of the time. Here is the truly heartbreaking part. One human being cannot save everybody. No matter how many hours Sean works, no matter how many lots he transforms, no matter how many videos hit 1 million views, the reality remains unchanged. Right now, somewhere in Detroit, there is still a woman praying for someone to show up. There is still a veteran whose yard grows more overgrown by the week. There is still a family living in a house that shouldn't be inhabited, waiting for a knock on the door. Buried beneath one of his videos, there is a quiet comment. Someone from an entirely different city wrote that they are waiting too. It's just one sentence, but it reveals that the list of people waiting is infinitely longer than the reach of any single person. Sean Stockman shows us what it looks like when someone genuinely shows up for their neighbors. And in doing so, in making the invisible visible, he also shows us just how many more are still waiting, still holding on, still praying that his truck will turn down their street. That is the real heartbreak, not for what has been lost, but for what has yet to be found.